for Dr. J.
Surprised it didn't fall off.
All right.
The Cure.
I think that's where we'll start the video. I'm surprised it didn't just fall off.
Gangrene.
Wait, what is it? People are Soylent Green.
Soylent Green is people.
Yeah, Soylent Green is people.
What a great movie. I mean, it's funny, but that movie is on its own really great. Anyway, you're talking about The Cure before you decided to readjust the camera.
We were talking about The Cure. We had a great little conversation about The Cure and about how when we were kids, we didn't get it. Didn't make sense.
Nope.
All the girls were like, "Oh, swoon, Robert Smith." Oh. Okay, it's cool. That's about it. It's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, he's cool. I mean, he is cool.
He is really cool.
He is so cool.
Now he's even cooler.
Yes. But if we were talking about how now, oh, I get it.
Yep. You have to be an adult male having entered into several relationships before The Cure makes any sense. You can't make sense to a teenager.
It doesn't make sense to a teenage boy. The teenage girls get it.
They loved it.
They still do.
They still love The Cure?
Man, pop any 15 or 16-year-old down and give her Robert Smith for 2 hours and she'll come out like, swoon. Oh, Bobby.
Bobby. Then we talked about
Morrissey.
Morrissey.
The whole point. The whole point of doing this is fucking the Smiths. I mentioned, and it kind of happened with the Smiths too. Like I didn't get it. Like it was cool. And now I get it. And Jason said, "You hate it more?" I said, "I still fucking hate Morrissey."
Well, he's a dick.
Yes.
He's an irredeemable dick. If he couldn't write music, he'd be worthless.
He'd be worthless. I think that's where I came up with the swoon thing. It's like, Morrissey, swoon. Anyway.
Speaking of romanticism.
We're talking about romanticism today. Not romantic.
Although sometimes they were.
Yeah, they were very romantic.
Byron, she walks in beauty like the night. Yeah. Oh my God. Talking about not getting that as a teenage boy. You get older, you're like, wait a minute.
Well, no. Read, give a 15-year-old boy Rochester.
Oh. And he won't.
Watch him turn like 8 shades of red.
And he won't get it.
He won't
because
get it.
They never do.
No. So. So the Romantics. No, and I thought this would be good because both of us, this was not planned, lectured today in our separate lit classes about Romanticism.
You teach American lit, I teach Brit lit.
Yep, so we were talking about the two different kinds of Romanticism. The British Romanticism, which is the original.
Yep.
And then American Romanticism, which is splintered.
Yes.
A bastardized version.
Yes.
But then when it gets back, when it's brought back over here, it splinters into several factions.
Yes. I would say that's accurate.
Yeah. Well, and it's that whole Hawthorne argument, and we'll get into that. So I guess should I tell the story about Wordsworth?
You absolutely have to tell the story about Wordsworth. Because we could both tell this story because it's transatlantic, but I think you should tell the story.
Well, I won't tell the story I'll save Emerson for later.
No, tell the story about...
I'm going to talk about the French Revolution.
You tell that story better than I do.
Okay. Because I love telling stories like this, and it's so good.
Yeah, because it humanizes them.
It does.
And we don't think of writers as being human beings.
No,
we don't think of Morrissey and Robert Smith as being human.
It's true.
Because of what they write.
Yes.
And there's no way a human being could do that. Hence, all the Shakespeare conspiracies.
Yeah.
A human being couldn't possibly do this.
I have a friend who buys into the Oxford.
Oh. You need better friends. You need better friends.
Oh, don't do that.
I can almost guarantee your friend hasn't read a ton of Shakespeare.
Oh, Jason.
Wait for the comments. Your friend is a dick. And they'd be right.
He was really cool. Was. It's like Johnny Dangerously. My mother punched me once. No, shot me. My mother shot me once.
Anyway, tell the story about Wordsworth.
Wordsworth. So Wordsworth, he was like in his early 20s.
Yes.
He was young.
It was a movement for young people, to be honest.
Well, okay, so he was in the Enlightenment at first.
Yes. As they all were.
And he would, and he, I don't know how he ended up in Paris, but he was there. He was there at the same time Jefferson was there.
Yep.
With Robespierre, and he was part of the group that were forming or trying to form what would become the Rights of Man. And none of them knew what would end up happening. Like even Robespierre, there's no way he sat down and thought, okay, when this is all said and done, I'm gonna have like 50 executions every day. Bring in the guillotine. It's more efficient.
Dinner and a show.
Oh my God. No, he didn't know. And so
none of them did.
When it fell apart.
Which didn't take long.
No, it didn't take long at all. He went back to London. I think he was in London, was where his apartment was.
He was in the Lake District, yeah.
Yeah. He went back to London. Barricaded himself for like 6 months.
Drank
himself into oblivion. And when he came out of this stupor, he started, and this is what I told my students this morning, he could smell it. He could smell it in the wind. He could smell it in the air. Something was different.
That's right.
And that's where, he didn't invent it, but that's where he started to really piece everything together. Yep. And then, of course, Coleridge comes along.
Yep.
Or how do you say it? Coleridge?
Coleridge, yeah.
Yeah.
One of.
British, American.
Yep.
Coleridge.
Sammy.
Yeah, good old Sammy. Sammy and Bill.
Sammy Taylor.
Sammy and Bill.
I don't think Coleridge was in France during the Revolution. In fact, my knowledge of his travels is limited. I don't know that he had to have gone to the continent, but I don't know. I really don't know his experience with the French Revolution, except what he heard through the press.
Yeah.
You want me to tell a story about when they first met?
Yes.
Okay.
Your turn.
So Coleridge had moved, and I'm pretty sure they were in the Lake District by this point, but Wordsworth lived with his sister forever, Dorothy, and her journals and diaries are worth anybody's time. But Coleridge found out that Wordsworth was living there. He ran up to his house and jumped over the fence to meet him. He had a troubled life too. But his troubles began when he got sick and the doctor said, "Here's some laudanum, it'll help." And then Coleridge kind of got hooked because he was an addict.
Which is why they were trying to. Okay, so tell him what you told me this morning about the fucking book.
All right. So the kind of the quintessential book of Romanticism, and the first book that actually developed a kind of a, because Blake is the first. Blake precedes Wordsworth, but Blake had no influence.
Yeah, no, because nobody knew about it.
Nobody knew about it. No one cared.
Yeah.
But Wordsworth and Coleridge wrote this book called Lyrical Ballads. And I didn't know this till I found this out last year. They wanted to travel to Germany. But they didn't have the money.
Why are they going to Germany?
Romanticism, right?
Well, yeah, well.
Yeah, but...
yeah, but what happens when they get to Germany? Coleridge finds his opium buddies. Coleridge is like, these are my people.
Yeah. But they said, I know what we can do. We can write a book. And they stumbled upon one of the most important books in the history of the English language.
Ever.
And it's Wordsworth. In fact, the preface that Wordsworth writes for it is almost as important, if not more important, than a lot of the poems in it.
When I was an undergrad,
yeah,
and we spent a week on the preface, then
the
second week was all the poem. Well, not all the poems, but all the major poems, like Tintern Abbey, Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Yeah.
Although Rime of the Ancient Mariner in that book is unrecognizable from the poem that he would eventually revise and publish again. Because it didn't have all the glosses.
Yeah, but the glosses became a poem unto
itself.
They did. It's so self-defeating.
Well, you start out, you're reading, and it's like, okay, so the glosses are helping me out here, and he gets it from these ballad books. It was these folk ballads had become very popular, and the most popular anthology came out that affected Coleridge was Percy's Relics. And he used glosses in the margins to help the reader along.
Right.
And Coleridge saw that and was like, that looks good. I think I'll do that. But first, some opium.
I was going to say, and then what was it, like the fourth stanza, the opium kicks in.
Yeah, because then he just goes crazy. But these glosses start out well enough, and you're like, this helps. I'm glad this is here. And then he starts talking about the moonlight, and you don't know why. It's just, this is when the train goes off the rails.
Well, no. What kills me is like, okay, so at the end, towards the end of the preface, and correct me if I'm wrong, Wordsworth goes on this diatribe about the common man's language. And then the first poem in the book is Rime of the Ancient Mariner.
Well, you can make an argument that he's using subject, verb, object throughout the poem. He doesn't use inverted syntax, but it's still not. I've never met a human being who talks that way. Nobody. It is an ancient mariner, and he stoppeth one of three. By thy long gray beard and glistening eye, now wherefore stops thou me? Who says that? Nobody says that. Jackass. My favorite Coleridge story was we've skipped Blake, but we can go back.
We'll go back to Blake, yeah.
Because Blake could have his own podcast.
No, because Blake's going to be good for when we talk about the effects.
Yeah, we need to.
Because the Pre-Raphaelites are a massive effect of this.
Yes, they are. But my favorite Coleridge story is he had gotten really high on opium because it was a day that ended in Y. Mm-hmm. And he came up with this poem, and he was writing furiously. It was Kubla Khan.
Ooh.
In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree. I'll do that again.
Yeah.
In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree. That poem.
Yeah.
And there was a rap at the door. And he answered the door. It was a guest. And he lost the poem. Oh. So what we have is a fragment.
Oh, man. I did not know that.
It's not a complete poem. He never finished it. All because someone came to the fucking door. You couldn't come some other time? Wait till tomorrow?
Maybe that's why that guy punched Hemingway.
I was writing something really good, you rat bastard.
He was an artist.
Oh, I was painting something really good, you rat bastard. Fuckers.
So what did Hemingway do? He threw the whole fucking batch.
And the guy overdosed.
He overdosed.
And died.
Oh my God.
No,
the funniest sentence in that is he says something like, and I'm paraphrasing, but something like, Ezra never mentioned him again.
Hemingway probably didn't even feel bad about it. Jackass. So these stories are powerful for a lot of reasons, not least of which they remind you, like, you think of Coleridge as being very serious.
Yeah.
And then you hear a story about him jumping over the gate to meet Wordsworth. It's like, but, what? So these stories are powerful. Do you want to trace all the way back to Blake now?
Mm-hmm.
You can talk about him first, and then I'll jump in.
Well, no, he's not mine, because my stuff, when we get talking about Emerson,
you take over.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, but you know some stories about Blake too.
Well, no, I know the stories you've told me.
All right. So, and I know that one of them is anecdotal, but it happened more than once. So Blake was a mystic.
Yeah.
He grew up with a family of dissenters, so they were anti-authoritarian, and he grew up with that. He grew up in that environment. And from a very young age, he saw angels and spirits. Mm-hmm. Now we would just lock him up in a padded room and be done with it.
No, now we'd give him really good drugs.
Yeah, probably so.
Yeah, it's too bad Coleridge wasn't around.
I have problems with this idea, though, that we too readily dismiss what he saw. Mm-hmm. Because without the visions he saw, and I told my students this morning, that if you look at the engravings, he's not making that up. All he's doing is capturing what he saw.
Yeah.
That's how he literally saw the world in bright colors.
So the important thing that we need to point out here about Blake, because you probably don't know about him, I think I'll put a link to the Blake archive in the description.
Oh my God! Yeah, so everything Blake ever wrote is in that archive.
Yeah, Blake. Okay, so what Blake did, and this is why he ties in well with the Pre-Raphaelites, because Dante and those guys, well, not, Dante Rossetti.
Yeah.
And those guys are, and I want you to think, we're talking about the Dante that wrote the Inferno. But Rossetti and those guys are copying a lot of what Blake did, because they were taking the paintings, they're matching them to these poems. Yep. So you had a visual narrative and you had a written narrative, and you put the two together and you had a complete narrative.
And that's Blake.
And that was what Blake was doing. Now here's what Blake did that made him different from everybody else. He did them on copper pieces.
Yes. And in order to get the words right, he engraved them backwards. And then he would engrave the illustrations around them, print them, and he and his wife would paint the illustrations. And he bound his own books. He bound them all.
Yeah.
He bound them all.
Everything was handmade.
Because he had to make a living.
For poems. Children, poems.
He had to make a living. His parents, when he was young, apprenticed him to an engraver for 7 years. Had he not been apprenticed, we may never have heard of him before. Yeah. The two stories about him that I like so much, one of them is anecdotal, but it happened, and I believe it. Guests would come by and visit, and they would go into the backyard, or what they would call the garden, and find them both, he and his wife, naked, reading poetry to each other. I think they were reading Paradise Lost while naked once. That's one of the stories.
The only world where that would make sense is in a Cialis commercial.
Mm-hmm. They were just both in bathtubs. So I gotta tell you, I never understood the Cialis commercial with the two bathtubs.
Till now.
How are you gonna have sex if you're in two bathtubs?
How did Blake and his wife do it?
Apparently outside, but they did it outside. The other story, and this one we know, though the exact exchange isn't clear, and I told my students this morning, is that he was allowed to live on, he had not really a patron, but someone was very kind to him and allowed him to live in one of his properties. And this British soldier, who was drunk off his ass, wandered up into Blake's property and started harassing Blake and insulting Blake and just being rude. And because Blake was a strong man, he was not weak, he physically removed him from the property. The soldier decided to press charges of sedition. So he accused Blake of saying things against the British Crown and government. And eventually, we went to court, and thankfully for us, it was, he was acquitted.
Yeah.
Though I told my students, it would not surprise me one bit if Blake hadn't said all the things the soldier said he did. Yeah. Because he hated government of every kind. All of it.
So we also need to talk about the work themselves.
The works themselves,
yeah, like the Songs of Innocence.
Astounding.
The Songs of Innocence, Songs of Experience. Songs of Innocence was a group of poems.
Yep.
Where, with the exception of the Chimney Sweep, which is
just dark. It's dark. It's so dark.
Except for the ending. The ending has this wonderful little uplift.
It does. But as if you can get past the weep, weep.
Jesus. But anyway, so the Songs of Innocence are very, I wouldn't say spiritual. They're lighthearted, right? They're not, Songs of Experience is more, they're darker.
And if I'm not mistaken with the publication history, he published the Songs of Innocence.
Yeah.
And then he published the Songs of Innocence and of Experience together.
Right.
I don't think he published a separate book called The Songs of Experience. The Two Contrary States of the Human Soul is the subtitle.
Yeah.
And they are...
It's phenomenal.
It's phenomenal, and it is the common language of everyday men and women.
Yeah. He did it. Wordsworth was not able to accomplish it, but he did it.
Not until later. He accomplishes it with intimations of immortality.
Yeah.
But
not at the beginning.
Not at the beginning.
Not what we're looking at in Lyrical Ballads.
No.
After he goes on that, like I said, the freaking diatribe where he's just going on and on and on.
Well, and Lyrical Ballads comes out 9 years after the French Revolution starts in 1798. But what Blake does is he writes a poetry that is so accessible in the Songs of Innocence and Experience that anybody can read it and take something away.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, to quote a couple of pieces, there are companion pieces. That's the other thing he did is he wrote companion pieces in both texts that connect to each other.
Yeah.
Namely, The Lamb and the Tiger.
And the Chimney Sweep.
That's right. And in The Lamb and the Tiger, little lamb who made thee, dost thou know who made thee? No one struggles with those lines. It's like, okay, I get it. And the tiger. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night, what a mortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? He's not hard.
Yeah.
His ideas are
hard.
daunting as hell when you dig into it, but you don't have to struggle with the language, unlike the Enlightenment poets, especially the Augustans, whose syntax is all jacked up, everything's reversed. Every time I teach The Rape of the Lock, I love that poem, but I dread teaching because I know my students are going to look at me like, I don't understand.
I don't get it.
And I don't blame them. I mean, it's hard, and you have to read it like 1,000 times to understand one sentence. Because in Pope, a sentence can go on for 8, 9, 10 lines.
Yeah.
Not with Blake.
Yeah.
Blake does it in a few. He can do it. He can do a sentence in a few lines, and then he's moving on to the next one. Sorry, I've got to text my son.
Go ahead. During this break, we want to remind you that if you want a cool, refreshing smoke...
God.
Reach for your Pall Mouse.
This is like an old...
Non-filter. Goes down smooth, comes up cancer.
Just get a text from my son. We're going to come over in like 30 minutes. No, you're not. I mean, you can. I told him 3 or 3:30 or something.
Yeah.
But, no, Blake also wrote, and these aren't read in college surveys, and there's a reason for that. He wrote a whole host of poems called prophecies, and they are hard.
Yeah.
The language, again, is very accessible, but the poems, the content is so hard to understand. But he didn't have an audience.
Right.
And no one really understood him. His work was displayed in the Royal Academy of Art at one point, but no one knew really what they were looking at. It took Gabriel Rossetti and the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, aka the PRB, to really make sense of what was going on. And Gabriel, one of the reasons Gabriel loved him as much as he did, and you mentioned this last night when you were going through the Rossetti archive through UVA, is his colors are so bright.
Yeah.
And a part of the reason that he was so attracted to Blake, probably
the
colors were so vivid.
And they both made their own colors.
Yes, they did.
That's the insane, when you go and see these things, whether you're looking at Blake or Rossetti, and you see these colors, the fact that they made them on their own, they came up with these pigments on their own. That's what I love. One of the things that I'm most attracted about to Rossetti, and this goes back to the early Renaissance painters, they were making their own colors.
They were.
Nothing looks the same.
Nothing looks the same.
The palettes are different every time.
They are, and that's incredible. But what Gabriel did is he came up with a selected poems and published that, and that helped a little bit. Mm-hmm. But it took Yeats to really promote it, and so Blake had been dead for so long.
Yeah.
And then the 20th century, someone said, maybe we should look at this again, and then scholars are like, wow.
Yeah.
This guy is incredible, and his reputation, I think, is probably cemented at this point. Yeah. He's not going anywhere. No. I can't see anybody, even the critical theory divas can't get rid of him.
No.
Because he's just too good. What are you going to say?
They've got nothing to get him out on.
No. I imagine they've tried. But he won't go away.
But he was lower working class.
He was.
That's why they can't get rid of him.
That's why they can't get rid of him. I mean, he's not an aristocrat.
No.
I mean, you can talk all day.
Even Wordsworth wasn't.
No. Now, he made a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that helped him, and he became middle class.
Yeah.
But he became middle class. Well, I mean, he was never poor, but okay.
Yeah, when he came back,
poor.
he was
poor. He was he lost everything.
Yeah.
But they can't find anything on Blake because Blake is just too far out there.
Yeah.
He does say some things about women that aren't very flattering, but not in the poetry.
Yeah.
That I know of. But he might be my favorite romantic poet. He and Shelley and Byron, and I love Shelley because Shelley just, and I'll get to Shelley in a little bit, but Blake did not have an influence until much later on. He did not take the typical track that a poet takes, in that he starts to have an influence near the end of his life, and then his reputation is established, like Wordsworth was, like Coleridge was. It took decades before people really kind of figured out, okay, this is our guy. And it wouldn't be nearly as good without the engravings, which is why it's a shame that our current textbook, which is a piece of shit, it has copies of the engravings in black and white.
Yeah,
You can't do that.
No. I got one of the actual copies, not one of the original copies. I don't have that kind of money. I've got a copy, the reprinted copies that have the engravings, and they have the original piece on one page, and then they've got a transcription on the other.
Yeah. And they're hard to read.
Yeah.
They're really hard to read because it's so artistically done. It's rendered well, but you really have to want to read it to make sense of it. It takes a lot of work.
It's still just mind-blowing.
What he accomplished is, I can't even begin to get my head around it.
Yeah.
So there's him, and that's the first generation.
And then, and Wordsworth, Coleridge,
Wordsworth, and Blake are the first generation. The second generation
You're talking British.
Yeah, British lit.
Yeah.
Because you divide it in two.
Yeah.
Older generation.
We'll get to the Americans in a minute because an American is not generations, it's factions.
It is factions. But if you look at, and the weird thing about the Romantic movement in England is it lasted from 1798 until about 1824, and that's the year that Byron died in the Greek Revolution, Turkish Revolution.
And what's funny is 1824, we're just getting started.
Yeah. America comes late to the party all the time until the 19 teens and 20s.
If it hadn't been for Emerson, we probably would not have gotten into it.
I agree with you. And that's why he's so important, even though I hate the fact he's important. Yeah, I mean, the guy was a jackass.
Yes, he was. We've already established that. Remember, we did an entire podcast just on Waldo.
Keats is amazing, but Keats's life was cut so short. I think he was 26. Mm-hmm. And he wrote this astounding poetry, and there are scholars who say that had he lived, had he lived to be much older, he would have surpassed Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And reading his work, he might have, but he died too soon of tuberculosis. He had consumption, and it was nasty, and he died unmarried and in love. Feel your pain. Unmarried and in love. Shelley also died young, but he drowned.
Yeah.
And I think when they buried him, they took his heart. They cut his heart out and buried it somewhere else.
Is that Mary's idea?
Who do you think's idea it was? It was Byron.
Byron.
It was Byron's idea. If it's true. If it's true. And I think it probably is.
Okay, so we have to explain something about the European Romantic movement that is different from ours. Out of it comes the Pre-Raphaelites.
Yes.
The Sublime.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, Shelley and Wordsworth they're the best at the sublime in British Romanticism. No one does it better.
I want to disagree there because Shelley's wife did it better.
I would say Shelley's wife does it in much the same way that Shelley does.
Yeah.
In a much longer format, right?
But my God,
it's amazing. No, Frankenstein's amazing.
What a novel!
But you see it in there are two distinct pieces where you see the sublime really developed in Wordsworth and Shelley. One is in Wordsworth's long poem, The Prelude, or as the British would say, The Prelude.
Your elitism is showing. Jason.
I can't help myself. When he talks about this moment when he's a young boy, he steals a boat and sails out and rows out onto the water and looks up and sees this mountain, and he's suddenly overwhelmed with fear.
Yeah.
That's the sublime.
Yeah.
And Shelley does it with Mont Blanc when he talks about the grandiose nature of the mountain, and you get this sense that we're all going to die and this mountain never will.
Yeah.
And then of course in Mary Shelley, I mean, her landscapes.
Yeah.
Just
at the very end where he's crossing the
ice.
The ice.
Yes.
Looking for the monster. Just the way she sets that up.
Oh, it's so good.
Oh.
It's so good. And
best 2 pages of the 19th century.
And that all came out of a trip that the Shelleys went on with Byron and John Polidori, who was Byron's physician, who wrote one of the first vampire novels. And they think it's Byron's idea. And Polidori just stole it. They were trying to see who could tell the best ghost story.
Yeah. And
Mary won. And then she wrote it down. And Byron was a rock star.
You keep saying that.
He was a rock star because he developed this kind of reputation. His reputation was just as great as his work.
See, here's the contention. Here's the argument. He keeps saying Byron's a rock star, and I'm like,
Well, no.
No, we don't see rock star until Dickens.
You understand? I'm talking about the lifestyle too.
Oh, the lifestyle.
He lived the life of a rock star.
Well, so did Dickens.
Well, Dickens was still.
He had his mistress living in the same house.
He did, but he was also still on the straight-laced side. Women would write Byron.
I bet he partied.
Women would write Byron these letters, telling him what they wanted to do with him. And he had a club.
Got that.
And he had a club foot. Which is, and he didn't care. Like, nothing affected him. He owned the most exotic pets he could get his hands on. He would have up to 15 to 20 pets at one time in an apartment. He made very little money off of his poetry.
Yeah. Because
copyright laws didn't exist, and publishers would see it and they'd steal it.
That was what Franny Fern ran into.
Yep, and a lot of them did. They ran into the same problem. And there were no creative writing departments, so they couldn't exactly just land a job at Oxford or Cambridge. My favorite story about Shelley, and I always get this wrong, I think he was at either, I can't remember if he was at Oxford or Cambridge, but he and a classmate decided to write a tract in favor of atheism. And to make it worse, Shelley said, let's distribute it to all the professors.
Oh my God.
And they threw them out. Shelley was an anarchist. He despised all authority. And you see it in Prometheus Unbound, which is probably one of his most exquisite poems. It's a dramatic poem. And he has this line. And if you don't know the story of Prometheus, I know you do, but yeah. Prometheus basically steals fire from the gods and gives it to human beings. And Zeus says, "You motherfucker.
Yeah.
Time to pay." So Zeus chains him to a rock, and vultures eat his liver every day, and every night it grows back. And one of the great points and it's early on in...
Those Greeks knew how to torture.
Oh, God, they're horrible. I'm going to turn into an animal and have sex with a woman. What? Who does that? But one of the great lines from Prometheus Unbound is when Shelley gets Prometheus to say, and it's breathtaking, it's very powerful, no change, no pause, no hope, yet I endure. Oh my God, it's so good.
That makes me, I wonder, because there's a line from Tropic of Cancer where Miller says, I have no money, no food, no hopes. I'm the happiest man alive.
And he may have been reading Shelley.
Yeah. I wonder if he was, well, he read Shelley.
I'm saying he may have been channeling Shelley.
I wonder if he was like quoting him.
He may have been.
Paraphrasing him.
May have been. And that's British Romanticism in a nutshell. The only difference with Byron is that Byron was also very funny.
Yeah.
And the other poets weren't funny. They just weren't funny. But Byron was funny. He wrote Don Juan, and he pronounced it Juan because he was making fun of how the British pronounce Juan, which is Juan.
Every time you fucking say it, I'm like, God damn it, Jason, it's Juan.
But that's how he pronounced it, because he was trying to make fun of how the British people could not pronounce any other language except their own. But he has a moment, because if you look at epic poetry, you're supposed to invoke the muse.
Yeah.
And when you invoke the muse, it goes on for line after line after line. Please help me write this poem, and blah 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 blah. And so what does Byron do in one of the opening lines of the cantos of Don Juan? He says, "Hail Muse," etc. And so that leaves us at 1824.
Yeah.
Which is near the beginning.
Not near the beginning. We're
4 years in.
We're getting going. Yeah, we're getting going.
So that leaves us with your particular brand of Romanticism.
So
American Romanticism.
And it all starts this little punk ass kid from Harvard.
A bastard.
So somewhere around his, what would be the equivalent of a junior year, but I think they only went 3 years back then, so it's like around somewhere between his second and third year in college. where he's going to become a minister. So stupid. Waldo's, good old Waldo. Ralphie boy. His parents come to him and tell him, you need experience. Before you get done with college, you need experience. You need to go to Europe. You need to travel. So he goes on this like 1.5-year expedition across Europe. And while he's in Europe...
Must be nice.
Yeah. While he's in Europe, he gets a hold of lyrical ballads. He talks to different people who have either associated with Wordsworth or who have associated with people who've been with Wordsworth. He finds out about this guy. So before he comes home, one of the last things he does is he goes to London and he meets Wordsworth. And he stays with Wordsworth, I think it's a month.
Oh, wow.
He's with him. And
poor Wordsworth.
Yeah. Well, no, he unloads on him, and basically just lays out Romanticism to him. This is what Romanticism is.
And what does Emerson do?
So Emerson, this is what I told my students today. Emerson gets on the boat, and on the way back, he says, "This is a really cool idea. I'm gonna fuck it up."
And
he did. Because at the same time that he's dealing with, that he's processing everything that Wordsworth has told him, he's coming up with this stupid idea called transcendentalism. Now, the marquee difference between American Romanticism and British Romanticism. The British Romantics believed that humanity had separated itself from nature.
I need to come back to that in a minute.
Yeah. But they had separated themselves from nature. And because of that, the object for Wordsworth and those guys was to bring humanity back to nature.
Not the Americans.
However, we had a unique feature, and this is something that it dawned on me today, and you confirmed it. You're like, yeah. We still had the frontier.
The English had nothing like that.
Yeah, y'all, the British did not have that because everything was closed off, and they'd pretty much...
they'd ruined it all.
They had ruined it all. We hadn't done that yet. No. We still were wide open. I mean, by the time, when you get to 1820, we are at the outside. We're 15 years from removed from Lewis and Clark. So they're still settling. You're still seeing early caravans of people going out to Oregon country and Washington and California.
Manifest destiny, baby.
Manifest destiny. And there's just all this open land.
Yep.
And so the way Emerson translates it is that humanity has not been separated from nature, but humanity is now in nature. That nature is around us and in us, and that we are a part of it.
But we don't see it.
We don't see it.
Yeah.
And his object was to get us to see it.
Now, the reason why the Romantics are lamenting this, and this is something I should have covered, but I got really excited about the stories.
Yeah.
Is that they are rejecting Enlightenment values entirely.
Well, and so do the American Romantics.
They do. And one of the things that the British Romantics are very open about, particularly Blake and Wordsworth.
Well, and it comes back to Wordsworth and his experience in Paris.
It does, but then he comes home and he's living in London. They're rejecting the Industrial Revolution because that's what separated us from nature. And that's what ultimately eradicated nature.
And of course, later you get Carlyle.
The thing that is also worth noting, and this is not my I was going to say ballywick, but that makes me sound really pretentious. It's not in my wheelhouse. But I studied with an expert in.
Because not in your wheelhouse is so much better.
Well, it's not as...
I want to start calling you Wordsworth because you're like, yes, I speak the language of the common man. It's not in my wheelhouse.
It's not my ballywick.
My ballywick. It's
not my cup of tea.
Yeah, it's not my cup of tea.
But
it's not my Snicker bar.
One of the things that he told us when I took the class on the American Renaissance, which is a troubling term in itself, he said that in the 1800s, a squirrel could hop from tree to tree without ever hitting the ground from Maine to Florida. That's how wooded it was.
Yeah.
So they were in it.
Yeah.
They saw it. Now they started to deforest it.
Yeah.
But they had a recollection of being a part of that in a way that the British just did not have.
Yeah.
And so the British are looking back and saying, we need to reclaim this.
Yeah.
The Americans didn't have to reclaim anything.
No.
They were there. And it's hard for us to see that, right?
Yeah.
When you look out here, there's no nature here. Mm-mm. I mean, there's some...
Okay, now you're tripping into Jameson.
Yeah, I mean, but look at that. That's not nature.
No, and okay, that's why I'm saying you're tripping into Jameson now because he says nature's gone.
Nature's gone.
Because what we've done is we've tamed it.
We did. There's no more wilderness, but there was wilderness when they were writing this stuff in America. Okay, now you can go back. Yeah, it's you again. Because I left out that piece, and it's kind of important.
Yeah, well, no, the industrial... Well, and even when we look at the Industrial Revolution, it was late coming here.
It was.
So when we're getting going in Romanticism, there's nothing to look at and say that's going to destroy us. What Emerson is talking about is the moral degradation.
Yes.
That's what he's talking about.
And he should have known because he was morally corrupt.
He was.
He was morally bankrupt.
Okay, we're not going to go that far because then you'll go off on a poor rant, and we're not doing that today,
Jason.
I'm
just saying he was morally bankrupt.
I know. So.
I'm being good.
Okay. So Emerson, he's part of this small group of intellects. And there are two particular people that are associated with him. A nice young lady named Margaret Fuller, good old Maggie.
Oh, Margaret.
And
poor
Nate.
Nate.
Oh, Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Natty.
So Emerson comes back and through different correspondence and meetings and such, he convinces a group of them to go out, and of course, he's not a part of this. He's never part of any of this, even with Thoreau, right? No. Oh, you want to build a little cabin in my backyard? That's fine. I'm not coming out there. You go do it. I'm telling you, I swear to God, I think it was a conversation where they made a bet.
It might have been.
That Thoreau couldn't do it.
Live in someone's backyard for a year.
Anyway.
He went camping.
He went camping in Emerson's backyard.
And then ate dinner with him every day. I'm sorry, dude.
No, 3 times a week.
Oh, sorry, 3 times. Oh, well, that's much better. and you never
get... It was when he had to go up and do laundry. Or excuse me, Emerson's wife had to do his laundry.
Yeah, Thoreau didn't do shit.
He didn't do jack shit. That is like the biggest pot smoking thing ever. It's like, I'm going to go smoke pot on your land for like 2.5 years and go swimming in your pond.
It's complete bullshit.
Anyway, so he convinces these idiots to go out and start a utopian society.
How'd that go?
And how he convinces Hawthorne, because this is so great, he convinces Hawthorne to get in on this because Maggie's going to be there.
And Hawthorne has a thing for Margaret Fuller.
Oh my God, he had it so bad for her. Until they went on that utopian society, he came out there, he's like, fuck her.
Didn't she die young? It was
did.
Tragic, right?
Yeah.
She drowned?
That was after all this.
Yeah.
But
clearly.
The funniest part is like he was so fed up with that woman by the time that whole thing was over.
He was disillusioned.
He was seriously disillusioned.
He would not like the Cure.
I think he'd be a Depeche Mode fan.
Oh yeah, personal Jesus. He would be.
I know.
Because he talks about the cult of personality in the Blithedale Romance.
Yes.
And the Blithedale Romance is about that utopia.
Yes. And the cult of personality he's talking about is her.
Yep. Because she was.
Because she was.
She was great, though. She was great.
She was phenomenal. But he
had nothing to do with it after that, did he?
No. No, he came out of that experience saying, I am not dealing with this woman no more.
But see what he is. And
here's the other important thing that happens to him when he comes out of that whole experience. And this is what we talked about today in class. He comes out of it because he didn't write Blithedale till later.
Yeah.
It's a reflection piece.
Yes.
He didn't write that as soon as he got out of there. He went back and looked at his journals from that time.
And then wrote it. Because he wrote Scarlet before that. Yes.
And Scarlet Letter is him attacking Emerson.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Because
do you think Emerson's Dimsdale?
No. What Dimsdale represents, and this is how I explained to my students today, Hester and Dimsdale represent two different perspectives of this romantic ideal. Okay? Dimsdale represents Emerson's perspective. Hester represents Hawthorne's. And the way he attacks Emerson is that everything that is noble, that Emerson holds up as noble, doesn't make sense. And so at the end, when Dimsdale finally confesses, it's too late. When he finally comes to his humanity, it's too late. He's ruined her life.
Yes.
He's destroyed her.
Yes.
Whereas and I told my students this today, we're set up to believe Chillingsworth is the villain of the novel. He's not.
It's Dimsdale.
It's Dimsdale.
Yep.
He robs her of a life.
He does.
And she is the perspective of the being truly noble. She fucking glows.
Yep.
When he brings her out of that prison, she's literally glowing.
Well, and that's the other exciting part of the novel is it's an attack on the patriarchy and the male-dominated society.
Yeah, which Emerson promotes.
Which Emerson does promote. Well, yeah, Emerson was a misogynist bastard.
Yeah. But it's an attack on Emerson. The whole novel is an attack on Emerson. We sit there and we focus on the Puritans, and we focus on what Hawthorne's doing with the Puritans. The Puritans are allegorical.
Yep.
He's attacking Emerson.
Yes.
And he's attacking the patriarchal culture that surrounds the novel when it's being written.
Yes.
It's phenomenal that way.
He's tricky, and one of the things...
And so that's one of the branches that breaks off. Remember we were talking about, you said there were stages, or generations, right?
2 generations.
In America, there's splits.
Yep.
Because you also have the Melville split.
Well, Hawthorne is peculiar because, and Melville's writing the Sublime too.
Yeah.
I mean, Moby Dick is the Sublime.
Yeah, but it's not the European Sublime. No. It's completely different.
It isn't.
Because what happens in the end, this is what's crazy. Okay, so we'll set this up. Oh, this is so good. So now I'm in my element. So we've got Shelley. We've got Frankenstein. The end of the novel, the monster's gone. And he's still looking for the monster.
Yep.
And he's out in the ice, and it's just the picture of this man in this barren wasteland of ice. That's what you've got at the end of Frankenstein. What's up, brother? How you doing?
All right.
Yeah?
Chilling.
Good. I want you to know this is the 3rd week in a row you'll be a guest on our podcast without being a guest on our podcast. No. It's a good thing. We introduced you last week. See you, man.
Melville.
So at the end of that, you have, he's in the middle of nature, and nature's a wasteland, and he's foreign to it, right? Look at the end of Moby Dick. Complete opposite. He's doing exactly what Emerson is talking about. Because where's Ahab at the end? He's a part of the whale.
Yes.
Nature
literally strapped to the whale, right?
Yeah. And nature consumes him.
Yep.
And he beckons them. We always think that he's beckoning them to come and kill the whale. No, what he's doing is come to me in nature.
Yep.
Come join me.
Well, the problem with Ahab, and this is why I think he's playing with the sublime, is that Ahab doesn't know that he should be afraid.
Yeah.
Whereas the sublime is about awe and fear.
Yeah.
And beauty. He's not afraid.
But who is
and
afraid?
It kills him. It's Ishmael.
Ishmael.
It's Ishmael. Because Ishmael is the romantic in the story.
Mm-hmm.
He's the only romantic in the story.
Yeah.
He's the only one who reflects on the sublime in any real way. but Ahab can't see it.
Yep.
And what I find fascinating about Hawthorne is in some ways in his books, he seems almost anti-romantic.
Mm-hmm.
At least anti-American romanticism.
Right.
I don't think he's anti-British romanticism.
He's anti-Emerson.
Yes.
He's pushing back against transcendentalism.
But I wouldn't say that what he produces is romanticism at all. I would say he produces, this is why he's so great, is you can't pin him down.
Yeah.
What do you do with Hawthorne? Where do you put him?
Well, you read him.
You that's all you can do. And any attempt to say he falls into a particular school,
right?
He did not play well with others.
No, he didn't. No, you got a point there.
And neither did Melville. Melville did not play well with others. Emerson wanted people to follow him. In fact, I think that was his problem, is he was a megalomaniac.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm being too hard on him, but I really think he wanted to be the leader.
I mean, the American scholar, all it is just setting himself up. This is what an important person looks like. This is what they should believe. We have a place in our culture. Yes, we are not physically contributing, but we can be the gatekeepers.
Yep.
He's got this platonic fucking egomaniacal bullshit.
Yes.
I mean, the man, you can see he read Plato.
Yes.
Because he believes it.
He's a Neoplatonic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just, I hate that guy.
But.
I know. God, what a writer.
But he's important.
He could drop some lines like a son of a bitch.
Yeah, well, so can cult leaders, okay? I mean, let's.
Well, let's look at Hitler.
Let's temper our praise. I think had Wordsworth known what he was going to do, Wordsworth might have shared less.
Yeah. Well, he was young.
He was.
And Wordsworth's probably thinking, here's another pupil. Here's another young man I can help. Because by that point, Coleridge was gone. See you, man. By that point, Coleridge was gone. Coleridge had abandoned him.
Yep. Well, they had a falling out.
Yeah. Big falling out.
It's kind of sad.
So then it is sad. So we go through Hawthorne and Melville. We go through the women because we can't forget about the women. Fern, Eden Southport, Catherine Maria Sedgwick.
Mm-hmm.
These are all romantics, all following in Emerson's footsteps, all following that tradition of where do we fit?
Yep.
Stephen Crane is pulling so much from these writers.
Yes.
When we finally get to naturalism, where he starts to set up that Darwinian structure.
Yes.
Within nature, right?
I would say that's accurate.
But then, and this is what I was telling you today, then Emerson meets this guy. This funky little bearded hippie.
Oh, I love that guy.
He says, and he talks to him, and little hippie goes, I've got all these really great ideas. And Emerson's like, write them. Get it out there. The little hippie dude says, okay, I will. And so he does. And then Emerson reads it, and the son of a bitch came out. And Emerson said, okay, it's too much for me.
Emerson loved the first edition of Leaves of Grass.
Yeah.
And
we're talking about Uncle Walt.
And then when Whitman came out in the poems, that's when Emerson said,
forget it.
Enough.
We're done.
Because he has that most famous quote. What is it? I welcome you to the dawn of a new career.
Yeah.
And says, okay, so the orgasm was too much. It's one step too far.
No. I think it was the head on the lap.
Yeah, and well, in students, it's weird because students don't want to see it.
They don't.
And I think.
Well, they don't want to see Annabelle Lee either.
Well, yeah, and I know, I get all that, but the thing about romanticism is it's supposed to be for the young.
Yeah.
And this is another conversation, but the young, only recently have the young not understood romanticism.
Yeah.
And my only thinking is they're far too cynical for it.
Yeah.
And when you have a cynical young person, that's kind of sad. They're supposed to be idealistic and hopeful. And this generation's not.
What is it? It says, not an inch of a man is vile. I love every... Yeah, not an inch of a man is vile. I love every... Does it say part?
I think.
And then, of course, the killer line is, shall I look away while my bedfellow journeys down the road, or something like that.
The walk of shame.
The walk of shame, yes.
And he loves him.
Yeah.
He is not given enough credit for writing great love poetry.
I know. It is fantastic. The whole, those 3 stanzas.
And what did he do? What was his job during the Civil War?
Wasn't he a correspondent?
He was a nurse.
Oh, was he?
He was a nurse.
I did not know that.
He worked in the Union hospitals for a while, but he had to quit because it was too much for him. He couldn't stand to see these young boys in so much suffering.
Yeah.
But he took care of them. I think he writes about it at one point in some of his prose.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he was also a correspondent. But
I thought he was a correspondent.
He did correspondence, but he starts out as a nurse.
Because that was his full-time job. He worked for newspapers.
He was a journalist.
Yeah.
In fact, he, in one of his most famous newspaper articles, attacks eroticism and pornography, and then writes "Leaves of Grass." I mean,
one part of Song of Myself is a woman standing behind a curtain masturbating.
Yep. But he would say that that's love.
Yeah. Well, okay, so the way I teach that is the connect, because right before that stanza is, or two sections before that is the one where the kid asks him what is grass. And he goes on that long philosophical dive into the grass is that which the grass was that which once smiled.
Yes.
And that, look at the babies who are now being held by the dirt, whose mother's arms, who were ripped from their mother's arms to be embraced. That's what it is. Who were ripped from their mother's arms to be embraced by the dirt.
Oh. Oh.
But then, by the end of that whole section, he comes to this thing where it's a cycle. That we are part of the cycle, and that we're going to continue to cycle through that, right? So when you get to her, what he's doing is he's saying, look at everything that we do in secret, but we all do it.
Yep.
So is it in secret?
Not if you share the same soul, it's not.
That's it.
And
what does he say at the very beginning?
For every atom that belongs to you as good belongs to me.
Yeah. You are no different than me.
We are attached. He does it, I think, to great effect in Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. That's my favorite as far as him developing his philosophy.
Right.
Because it's clear, and I make them read Song of Myself when I was teaching American Lit, but I would tell them, here's a condensed version. Read Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. It'll make more sense to you than what you just read in Leaves of Grass. So, because Song of Myself is challenging because it's long.
It's challenging. It's challenging until someone says, look at it this way. Because I don't think, here's the problem, if they don't, okay, so the first thing that they make a mistake is, they think, okay, 19th century, they're not going to write the way we write. They're not going to talk about things that we talk about. So there's the first problem. The second problem is that his language can get dense fast.
Yes.
But the things that he really wants to tell you,
he's very plain about.
And it's in your face. And I think they get tripped up thinking that that's supposed to be dense too.
Yeah.
Because he moves in between.
He does.
That's why Ginsberg loved him so much.
Well,
because when you look at Howl, he does the same shit.
He does.
It gets really dense and then all of a sudden it clarifies. And then it gets dense again.
Well, and the 3 poets that Ginsberg cared about the most, William Carlos Williams, Walt Whitman, and William Blake. Mm-hmm. And we're back where we started. Mm-hmm. With old Billy Blake.
Bill.
So, now what? I mean, trying to convey this to students is not easy.
You got your opening?
Yeah, I'm going to do it eventually. I haven't forgotten.
Well, no, and here's the thing, right? So, this comes to this argument. So you are a medieval British.
That was my master's.
That was your master's.
PhD is 19th century.
19th century British. Okay, so you're more Victorian.
That's my, I'm a Victorianist.
I'm an American modernist.
Yes.
Right?
Neither of us is a romanticist.
No, but both of our movements were highly impacted by the Romantics. Because when you look at, from my point of view, when you look at the modernist movement, everything they're doing with the individual, everything is romantic. Well,
the Victorians were reading the Romantics. Mm-hmm. There's a great anecdote. Byron died of fever in the Revolution, the Turkish Revolution, Greek Revolution, Turkish Revolution, and this young boy in Lincolnshire went outside when he found out and wrote on a rock, "Byron is dead." And the little boy, Alfred Tennyson. All of those guys were deeply impacted by the British Romantics, and you see it with the Victorians. They are not so much a different movement as a continuation, because they sound romantic, like the beginning of In Memoriam, Tennyson's elegy for his friend Arthur Henry Hallam, who died suddenly. In talking to God, or whatever God is to Tennyson,
right,
he says, "Our little systems have their day. They have their day and cease to be. They are but broken lights of thee, and thou, O Lord, art more than they." And he just spins this web about God, but he never clarifies what God he's talking about. So it could just as easily be nature.
Yeah.
He's right. He's a romanticist in the Victorian era.
So at the beginning of this, I thought, at some point, I challenged myself silently. At some point, I'm going to bring this to Gatsby.
Because you always do.
Because I can.
Yeah, where does Gatsby fit into this picture?
As soon as I say this, you're going to be like, oh yeah? You were talking about the impact.
Yep.
We were talking about the modernists and the Victorians. There's a scene in Gatsby where they're going into town, and he notes the mountains of ash. Right? Where are the mountains of ash? They're in between the two pieces of civilization. Where's nature? It's at the modernist point where we finally get to where the British were during the Romantic period.
There's no more nature.
And so this revival, this romantic revival that we see among the American modernists in the teens and 20s and 30s is a revival of the British Romanticism, not the American Romanticism. Because, and you brought up the Renaissance, right?
A deeply troubling term.
What is Pound calling for in 1913?
A Renaissance.
An American Renaissance. Why? Yeah. Because he understands, he actually pinpoints the birth of American Lit in 1880. But the original argument from that professor, there's a professor in the 1930s.
Ferguson?
Yes, thank you. This guy Ferguson comes up with this idea in the 1930s that Hawthorne, Melville, and Whitman were part of a quote-unquote American Renaissance. The problem with that, as you pointed out, in order to have a Renaissance, you have to have a nascence.
And we didn't.
And we didn't.
Until then.
Until they came along. They are the nascents.
And that makes them more powerful, I think.
And so when Pound calls for a Renaissance, it's a true Renaissance.
Yep.
And we got it.
We got it.
And we did everything that Pound told us to do. That's the freaky thing.
Yep. You know what I think? Something's got to give.
Well, now comes the question. We'll end on this. Are we in, okay, this is the eternal question. This has been the question since the 1990s. Are we in a neo-romantic period, or did romanticism never end?
Well, if you look, okay, so I would be willing to say that there was a hiatus.
Okay.
And modernism was that hiatus in some ways.
See, my argument would be that modernism is romanticism.
It may be. It may be that the only issue, I think, and you see this in Williams. I'm not an Americanist, but I'm obsessed with the modernists, so I can actually talk about them with some facility.
Yeah.
They're obsessed with machine culture. This is something that Julian Murfitt talks about. A true romantic would be suspicious.
Yeah.
But in the 1960s, you have a poet named Robert Bly. You have a poet named Galway Kinnell, and some of these other American poets who are rejecting modernism and going back to Wordsworth and Coleridge, and they're celebrating a romanticism based on British Romanticism, because you're right, they're writing at a time when nature in America is gone.
Dying. Yeah.
It's gone. It's just gone.
And what are the postmodernists doing?
This is all there is.
This is it.
This is all there is. Baudrillard would say that this is nothing more than a simulation.
Yeah.
This isn't even real.
Well, you brought up Jameson earlier. Well, yeah, I did, because you were
but I was
pointing
channeling
to it.
him.
Yeah, you were channeling him, and he says, all this stuff is dead.
Yeah. And he's not wrong.
No.
So I think we are due for something that is more obviously romantic. I think we should go back to it. And the reason I think we should go back to it, because the one thing that Romanticism offers that postmodernism does not offer is hope.
Yeah.
And we are living in a time in which we desperately need hope. And Romanticism provides hope. We need it. More than ever, we need it. But I don't know how long it's going to take before we get there. But we need it.
So we'll come full circle. Because the one thing you have not talked about is Tintern Abbey.
I did not. Well, that's your poem. It's not my favorite. That's your poem.
Because, so the story is, the legend is, he wrote that in that apartment.
Yeah.
And that's how he came out of his funk.
Yeah.
Because he was thinking about when he and his sister were children. And he actually alludes to this in two of the stanzas.
Yes, he does.
When he's talking about crossing the bridge.
Yes.
The beauty of the poem is the scene where he comes up to the abbey and nature has crawled up onto it.
Yes.
He talks about the vines and he talks about how beautiful it is.
Yes.
That you have that marriage
Yes.
of man and nature.
Yes.
That's romanticism.
Yes. And my favorite is the Intimations Ode, and he does something rather similar.
Yeah.
When he talks about the eternal soul. He doesn't call it that, but he says our birth is but a dream and a forgetting.
Yeah.
We exist before we're born.
Yeah. Well, and so the impact, for me, the impact of Tintern Abbey is it's the post-French view. It's the post-French Revolution view.
It is.
That humanity has failed me.
Yes.
So I'm going back. He goes back to his youth.
Yes.
I'm going to hit the reset button.
And he does.
And he does. And I think, and that's to me, that's it.
Yes.
That marriage of man and nature and that idea of, I want to hit the reset button.
Yes.
And that is truly romantic. All right. I think we're done.
That's a good way to stop, actually.
That was.
ending with a great poem.
Yes.
And it's one of his best.
Oh, God. So, I can quote rock lyrics. He can quote poetry. So, I'll just say this. I feel stupid and contagious. I'm the barber. That's Dr. J. Peace.
Now it's time for Dr. J.